Hi, everyone, and welcome to your second performance lecture, which is Poetry and the Making of Self and Culture. All right, I want to start by just talking about the types of language we have as communicators. We have pragmatic language, and pragmatic language is coming to get a result. So I would say, shut the door, slow down. That is pragmatic language that I'm wanting you to directly do that action. There's also illocutionary language that you have to have some power for it to mean anything. I pronounce you married. You have been found guilty, right? You have to have authority to have that illocutionary languages that change people's lives. And then everything else is expressive. Language meant to stir our emotions, to connect, to repel. So, poetry and song, which are considered lyrical literature, meet this criteria. I'll just quickly go over who you're going to read for this unit. I'm going to have you read a special issue from the premier journal in performance and communication, which is called Text and Performance Quarterly. Heidi Rose from Villanova University was the editor of this volume. She invited Jim Ferris, who is a poet as well as a professor from the University of Toledo, to co-edit it with her. I'm going to also have you read Elizabeth Bell, who is a theorist, who's going to talk you through how we perform different social roles and identity that helps us clearly connect the performance of literature to the performance of daily life and living in our diverse nation. You're going to read Jim Ferris, who is a poet that talks about what it's like to live with a disability. Petra Kuppers, who also has a disability. She's at the University of Michigan, and she's going to respond to Jim's work as a reader. And then Reagan Fox is a professor at the California State University at Long Beach. And he is also a poet. He doesn't perform poetry as much anymore as he did 10 years ago when this was published, but you're going to read him. He talks about sexuality. And then Karma Chavez, who is a faculty member at the University of New Mexico, and she's going to offer her response. I want to talk a little bit about that idea of what poems and songs stay with us, what draws it to us. Sometimes it's the lyrics, sometimes it's the rhythm, sometimes it's the association. I'll give you an example. There's a song that I sort of liked in college. Wasn't one of my favorites, but it was Forever Young by Bob Dylan. And I liked the lyrics. I liked the rhythm. But I had a friend, my best friend, named Casey, and she was a huge Bob Dylan fan. And so she'd have us listen to this song quite a bit. And she'd always say, you know what? I can't picture myself growing old. I feel like somehow I am forever young. I can't picture myself above the age of 40. And I laughed and I said, well, who knows? I was at that time, 40 seemed so far away. Casey died at about 34. And at that moment, as I thought about that song, every time I hear it, I think of her. I have this association of Casey and how maybe she chose to travel the world all through her late 20s and early 30s because she had that sense that time was running out and she didn't picture herself as an older person. And I now sing that song to my sons. They sing it back to me. And I love the lyrics. I love the rhythm. I'm a Bob Dylan fan as well. But what I really like is that association. So as you pick something for this unit, there's different ways that you can be drawn to a poem or a song. It can be it can be the lyrics, it can be the rhythm, it can be an association for you, how it makes you feel, what it makes you remember. So think about that and try to find one that works well performing for an audience. There is this idea that lyrics, unlike a paragraph form that we did for the last unit, are meant to evoke the senses in a way that meaning is very concentrated. We talked in the last unit about it's important to remember to emphasize certain words. Be very strategic in this unit because every word tends to be chose with care and strategy. So don't throw lines away. Really think about each line. Where's the emphasis? Where's the breath? Where's the pauses that's going to make this come to life? I'm going to talk a little bit about poesis versus poetics. There is this moment of making. Every interaction you have make something that could be interpreted. Poetics is how we analyze, understand, think about everything we do, create. Now, poesis, every time we interact, there's an opportunity for poetics, that analysis. Of course, we go through the day and we have thousands and thousands of moments that we forget. But there are those few that we remember, we contemplate about. People in this unit wrote a poem or a song about it, right? And so to be thinking about how these are the moments that we analyze and think through. And poesis and poetics are connected as you choose a piece and then do that analysis. So, poesis, you're going to create an expressive moment as you record for your audience. Poetics is both the written and oral that will provide further meaning making. So you do this first in your script that has your analysis that goes through it, and then your defense, and then you deliver that defense orally that is also poetics. Now, I'm going to go through, this is going to feel a little bit like English, but these are slightly different when we come to performance. Allusion, metaphor, analogy, and personification are how we interact with poetry and how poets use strategies to bring us in and understand the piece. So in this way, I'm going to go through and give you moments of where the poets for this unit used these strategies. Allusion, you're going to listen to Tell Aristotle by Jim Ferris. And it's called Tell Aristotle because the Greek philosopher said that any child who is born with a disability should be left to the elements to die. And this was a common practice in ancient Greece, that if a child was born with or developed a disability, they would be left outside alone. So they succumbed to the elements, they were eaten by animals, they were decided they shouldn't live. And you have to know that to get the significance of Jim's poem, which is why in his introduction, he translates this allusion for us in case we didn't know. So allusion is, we're going to talk about a historical event, another piece of literature, something people would need to understand in order for the poem or song to be meaningful and make sense. Next, there's metaphor from Water Cycle. Jim says, slurping at the pink fountain. He's not literally talking about drinking from a pink fountain. It represents chasing human life, connection, how we hunger for experience, we hunger for relationships. Okay, so that's what that's looking at. So as he says, slurping at the pink fountain, it is a metaphor for chasing life and connection. Of course, you would need to understand this relationship that he's creating, not to take it literally. A lot of poems and songs have these metaphors to help us connect imagery, connect emotion and feelings we might not necessarily connect without the poet's guidance. An analogy functions very similar to a metaphor, except it emphasizes the shift of how one thing becomes another in the poet's mind. In Headstone, Reagan says, lymph nodes turn to braille as he's thinking about trying to read whether or not he's sick in his lymph nodes. Now, are lymph nodes actually braille? Of course not. But it's that connection that helps us make an understanding, develop an empathy through this new analogy that we might not have thought of before. Personification. Personification is when we give life to something that is not alive. For example, in Headstone, Reagan says a quilt is large enough to swallow cities. Now, can a quilt actually swallow anything? Of course not, but that helps us feel its size and how, and its massiveness, that it feels as though it's consuming the space. In Water Cycle, Jim says a bleak, thin, thirsty night. Nights can't actually thirst. They don't have an ability to drink, but we get that idea of while a night can't literally consume liquid, we can feel this idea of it being thirsty, right? It cannot actually feel thirst, but it's been personified. So we see the night as feeling something as human beings we can feel. And then there's repetition. Repetition is every single chorus of a song, the words we speak over and over. Reagan in Paris is Burning kept using the term disgusting to show how what is actually disgusting versus how the woman in the opening piece is defining disgusting. Now, Jim Ferriss and Tell Aristotle, it's tell them, tell him. He says again and again and again, tell, 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 as in we need to get this word out. We've got to shift ideas. We've got to shift society. Go and tell. Okay? So that's repetition. When you have these here, realize these strategies, decide how you're going to emphasize them to help this poem come alive for the audience. Now, also be considering Belle's social roles and what does it mean to take on the role of another body, to claim an identity. And part of that begins with who we assume is not us. That person isn't someone we identify with, or that person is someone we feel connection to. and realize that sometimes we're just performing a voice, and this is the day-to-day life of this is how it is. We have an intimate understanding. There can be an idealization. We romanticize what it might be like to live in that body. Sometimes we're managing stigma or a spoiled identity, as Irving Goffman would talk about it. And that's a body that overall is marginalized in society, that is not treated well. And that can happen because of gender, because of sexuality, because of nationality, because of race, because of size. There are bodies we value and bodies we don't. And what does it mean to hear the stories from those bodies, and how does that shift cultural understandings, create empathy and connection? And also, there's always that passing. We might consider us to be within a group or without, but we can be misinterpreted. We can be miscategorized. People can see us as belonging to a different group than we identify with. I remember I have a student who was from Canada, and he was very surprised that he himself very much did not identify with US culture, but found that people would constantly miscategorize and just see Canada as part of the United States, and how that was very odd for him, and how it was very easy to pass as a United States citizen, but he didn't really want to. There's, of course, also stories of how people pass because it can give more power, how people of color historically would try to pass for white when we had a segregated society because it gave them more options, gave them more things they could do. Same with people. People would sometimes conceal sexuality in order to be able to gain jobs and gain connections they might not have been able to because queer bodies were so marginalized. So there is this idea of you can play with that passing of what does it mean? Can I pass as this body even though it's not mine? And what does that mean in the performance? And how is that going to play into my defense? So remember, just an overview, it has to be a poem or a song. Does not need to rhyme, but it can. You can't sing. This isn't a cover. This is a spoken word interpretation. It has to be at least 4 minutes. That includes the intro and defense. So remember, as soon as your recording starts, that's when I start counting the 4 minutes. As soon as it ends is when I consider it an ending. So know that as long as from the time your rolling begins to the end is 4 minutes, you're all set. If you have any questions, as always, you can feel free to reach out. We'll also talk it through on discussion boards and in our response groups. Okay, here's the rubric for your poetry script. It's very similar to your prose script. Going through, you can look up, it's right on Canvas. So make sure that as you go through, all of those rules are the same as they've always been. If there are characters, they should be defined. Regardless, you need to make sure your emotional intent and your movement is clear in the script, as well as your introduction and your defense with your outside sources carefully analyzed in your in the worksheet that is provided. Also, I'm going to have the same rules when I'm looking at your lyrical performance. Be thinking about how to make sure you're engaging with the camera effectively, you're using voice variation well to interpret the piece. And of course, your movements might be more subtle. It might be just gestures and facial expressions. If you're going to have a wider panoramic view with lots of movement, then of course you're going to block more. And then the rubric for your defense, as always, you want to make sure it is element of human experience and then a performance decision, that it's prepared. Remember, you're delivering it like a speech, and that you orally cite your references. And that's all I have. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to going through this unit with you.